June 14, 1940, German boots stomped along the ancient cobbled streets of Paris. Paris, queen of the civilized world. She spawned the Age of Enlightenment, Voltaire, Pascal, Descartes, and nurtured Monet, Cézanne, Matisse. To her writers and poets, Paris was freedom, Paris was love, Paris was France. When Adolf Hitler triumphantly arrived in Paris, he said, "It was a dream of my life to see Paris. I am overjoyed that today my dream has become a reality." The capital city is a traditional diamond that the enemy must snatch to win the game of war. The fall of Paris ended the first phase of World War II in Europe. I was there. The question the world asked as Jack Boots marched down the Champs-Élysées was clearly this: how did this happen? Adolf Hitler identified himself with the great conquerors of history, Alexander the Great, Caesar, Napoleon. He saw himself as a messiah sent by Providence to save modern Germany. In his words, the Nazi mission was to secure for the German people the land and soil to which they are entitled on this earth. Hitler's timetable was precise. He would chip away at Europe, reclaiming territory stripped from Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, he seized the Rhineland and claimed he wanted nothing more. In 1938, Austria was annexed, and again Hitler said that was all he wanted. Within 5 days, he set his next target, Czechoslovakia. In London, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain pursued a policy of appeasement with Germany. Along with British pacifists, intellectuals, and business interests, he abhorred war, and he preferred fascism to communism. He expected no help from isolationist America. France was undergoing another of her many government crises. The Popular Front coalition had broken up, leaving a paralyzed foreign policy. Premier Daladier had no choice but to follow Britain's lead. In Germany, Hitler and Goebbels launched an intensive propaganda campaign. It was a Nazi media blitz designed to convince the Germans that the 3 million people of German origin living in Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland were being persecuted. Hitler demanded justice for Czechoslovakia's Sudeten Germans. It was time, he said, to repatriate and protect German kinfolk. Through the summer of 1938, the Nazis pounded home their theme: the Sudetenland must be German. To intimidate Czechoslovakia, Hitler staged military maneuvers on the Czech frontier. The Germans in Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland, taking orders from Berlin, demanded autonomy. Czech President Eduard Beneš had been pushed to the brink by Nazi agitation in the Sudetenland and the specter of an invasion by Hitler. Nazi violence and terrorism erupted. President Beneš ordered a partial mobilization of the Czech army, one of the strongest in Europe. The Czech government did not intend to give up without a fight. Well-equipped and well-disciplined, the Czech army frightened the German general staff. Hitler, nevertheless, was furious at the Czech mobilization. To the dismay of his generals, he vowed to wipe Czechoslovakia off the map. In London, fear of war prompted Prime Minister Chamberlain to seek an audience with Hitler. He was determined to avoid war at all costs.
My policy has always been to try to ensure peace. And the Führer's ready acceptance of my suggestion encourages me to hope that my visit to him will not be without result.
Hitler and Goering faced possible obliteration by the combined forces of Czechoslovakia and France, allied by a mutual defense treaty. Chamberlain's arrival provided Hitler with a thin strand of hope. He expected Chamberlain to make strong demands and was baffled by the British Prime Minister's willingness to concede everything that he had been planning to take by force. Chamberlain returned to London to convince his cabinet and the French that Hitler should be given all areas of Czechoslovakia that were more than 50% German. Czechoslovakia was pressured to accept, and Chamberlain prepared to dash off for his second meeting with Hitler.
European peace is what I am aiming at, and I hope that this journey may open the way to get it.
On September 22nd, Chamberlain arrived in Gothenburg, Germany, confident that he had negotiated a settlement. By this time, the naive prime minister, who trusted the Führer's word, would meet a different Adolf Hitler. After the first encounter with Chamberlain, Hitler decided he could get anything he wanted out of him. True to form, Hitler would step up his demands. Chamberlain believed the crisis would subside. He would soon tell the Führer that the British, French, and Czech governments had accepted his demands. Chamberlain was cheerful, optimistic. Hitler bided his time, listening in sullen silence. He would allow Chamberlain to do all the talking, then spring his trap. Conditions had changed, he would say. The Sudetenland must be occupied by Germany at once. The deadline is October 1st. The alternative is war. Seeking peace, Chamberlain swallowed his pride.
After my visits to Germany, I realized vividly how Herr Hitler feels that he must champion other Germans. He told me privately that after this Sudeten-German question is settled, that is the end of Germany's territorial claims in Europe.
The French and Czechs rejected Hitler's ultimatum. France would honor her treaty to aid Czechoslovakia. During a shrieking speech that almost caused his generals to revolt, Hitler repeated his threat. Intimidated by Hitler's rage, a desperate Chamberlain enlisted Mussolini's help to set a third meeting.
When I come back, I hope I may be able to say, as Hotspur says in Henry IV, out of this nettle danger, we pluck this flower safety.
The Munich conference, requested by Mussolini, began on September 29th. French Prime Minister Daladier was in a daze. He was about to dishonor the signature of France and abandon Czechoslovakia, the nation she had promised to defend. Prime Minister Chamberlain was determined that no one, neither the French nor the Czechs, should stand in the way of averting war. On September 30th, the Munich Agreement officially dismembered Czechoslovakia. President Beneš was not even present to witness his nation's fate. A democratic state had been sacrificed to avoid war.
As symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Well, I would say that appeasement was not just the personal policy of Neville Chamberlain. Appeasement was a policy which was supported by a lot of people in England, and particularly won the support of, I think, in the English business community, people who thought they could do business with Hitler, thought Hitler was good for business, thought a little discipline was great for the national life. These people, on the whole, preferred Mussolini to Hitler, but if they had to choose between fascism and communism, they would choose fascism any day, and Hitler was a bulwark against communism. So for all these reasons, a lot of people in the British upper class, particularly in the commercial upper class, favored a deal with Hitler and thought that they could live with Hitler.
And so, my friends, the time has come for me to announce, with solemnity perhaps, but with great happiness, a fact. I hereby dedicate the World's Fair, the New York World's Fair of 1939, and I declare it open to all mankind.
In spite of FDR's optimism, W.H. Auden's poem 1939 came closer to the truth. The nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. America's 20-year dedication to isolationism left the nation with a military establishment that was tragically weak. America had little more than a skeleton army.
Das erste Ziel ist Danzig.
The free city of Danzig, the last vestige of the Versailles Peace Treaty. It was carved from Germany in 1919 to give Poland access to the sea. Its inhabitants were German. In March '39, Hitler demanded that Poland return to Germany, the port city of Danzig. A courageous but pitifully antiquated Polish army was determined to resist. This time, Britain and France pledged to defend Poland against aggression. Poland expected to outmaneuver Germany diplomatically and with her cavalry. In late August, Hitler sent Foreign Minister Ribbentrop on a surprise visit to Moscow to consummate one of his boldest diplomatic moves, a 10-year German-Soviet non-aggression pact. Moscow would have preferred a security treaty with Britain and France, but negotiations dragged on with no result. The agreement signed by Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov and Ribbentrop pledged that each country would remain neutral if the other went to war.
Achtung, Achtung, hier ist London mit Nachrichten in deutscher Sprache. Lord Halifax erklärt im Oberhaus.
Hitler had closed the back door. He was now free to move on Poland, and Europe was on the brink of war. The French and British made it clear they would fight if Poland were attacked. Hitler thought they would back down. It was his greatest miscalculation. The British policy of appeasement was dead. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. The dress rehearsal had smashed up Guernica, Barcelona, and Madrid. World War II marks the debut of Blitzkrieg.
Ambassador in Berlin handed the German government the final note, stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
In 1914, Frenchmen had marched off to war singing in their innocence poems about the glories of war in the trenches. This time they were silent. I watched them at dawn in the railroad station in East Paris. They wore the shapeless uniforms from 21 short years before. They did not resemble men at the start of a war. They resembled men at the finish of a war, as if they were still tired from 1918. They looked back, expressionless in their hundreds from the train windows. One observer said, not one replaceable face. They were men with no particular wish to win a war. They had won the last one and knew in their hearts that France had been defeated in its body and spirit, if not on paper. On September 3rd, in a fireside chat, President Roosevelt solemnly and with a touch of regret proclaimed America's neutrality.
This nation will remain a neutral nation, but I cannot ask that every American remain neutral in thought as well. Even a neutral has a right to take account of facts. Even a neutral cannot be asked to close his mind or to close his conscience.
Hitler consolidated his victory in Poland, then on October 6 offered a peace ultimatum. Accept Poland's status quo or a fight to the finish. Britain and France rejected his offer. The French army secured itself behind the Maginot Line. They had no stomach for attacking Hitler's Siegfried Line and were sure that their defenses were invincible. The long months of waiting, feint and parry, set in. They called it the Sitzkrieg, the sit-down war. The British sent an expeditionary force to France, but they hardly seemed like men going off to battle.
We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried Line. Have you any dirty washing, mother dear? We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried Line, 'cause the washing day is here. Whether the weather may be wet or fine, we'll just rub along without a care. We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried Line, if that Siegfried Line's still there. Mother dear, I'm writing you from somewhere in France, hoping this finds you well. Sergeant says I'm doing fine, a soldier and a half. Here's the song that we all sing, this'll make you laugh. We're going to hang out the washing on the Siegfried Line. Have you any dirty washing, mother dear? We're going to hang out the washing on the Siegfried Line, 'cause the washing day is here. Whether the weather may be wet or fine, we'll just rub along without a care. We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried.
They called it the Phony War. On November 4th, President Roosevelt signed his hard-won cash and carry bill that repealed the arms embargo, allowing the Allies to buy weapons with cash and deliver them on their own ships. Calling on America to become the arsenal of democracy, the President urged increased aid to the Allies and strengthening America's defenses. In 1940, the regular army consisted of only 225,000 men. FDR still hoped a peaceful settlement was possible, and he sent Undersecretary Sumner Welles, an old Groton and Harvard classmate, on a delicate peace mission to Europe: Paris, Moscow, Berlin. In Berlin, Reichsmarshal Goering explained Germany's needs to a patient Welles. Welles would return to Washington with a gloomy report. The trip had been fruitless. There was little hope for peace in Europe. Welles' assessment would soon become the rationale for Roosevelt's fateful decision to run for a third term. In the spring of 1940, America geared up for a wide-open presidential election. The Wisconsin primary attracted a number of strong Republican challengers. New York's young district attorney, Thomas Dewey, conservative Senator Robert Taft of Ohio, isolationist Senator Arthur Vandenberg of Michigan, and dark horse Wendell Willkie. Suddenly, war dominated politics.
This very day, the 10th of May, 1940, this very day, 3 more independent nations have been cruelly invaded by force of arms. I am glad that we Americans, of the 3 Americas, are shocked, that we are angered by the tragic news that has come to us from Belgium and the Netherlands and Luxembourg.
Seldom has there been in history the more brutal attack as we are witnessing now on the part of Germany. The Netherlands are resisting
imposes all the forces of the nation against the invader. Belgium has acquired the experience of facing overwhelming odds, and she knows her enemy.
Norway, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, the Nazi juggernaut swept through the lowlands, then pushed to the English Channel.
A tremendous battle is raging in France and Flanders. The Germans, by a remarkable combination of air bombing and heavily armored tanks, have broken through the French defenses north of the Maginot Line, and strong columns of their armored vehicles are ravaging the open country, which for the first day or two was without defenders. We have differed and quarreled in the past, but now one bond unites us all, to wage war until victory is won, and never to surrender ourselves to servitude and shame, whatever the cost and the agony may be.
Evacuation of Dunkirk left the Maginot Line outflanked and the door to Paris open. By the second week in June, a pall of black smoke gathered over Paris from the army smoke screens to the north. Along 1,000 streets, the lifeblood ran out of Paris. Paris was dying like a beautiful woman in a coma. An eerie quiet fell over the city. Those walking stopped, those talking fell silent. We didn't know that a minor officer named de Gaulle was making his way to England with a few others of like mind, to whom the loss of France was the loss of a battle only, not the war. Adolf Hitler dictated armistice terms to the French in a railroad car at Compiègne, outside Paris, the same site where the German army had capitulated to the Allies on November 11, 1918. Now Hitler would repay the humiliation. The fall of Paris ended the first phase of World War II in Europe. I was there. The question the world asked as Jack Boots marched down the Champs-Élysées was clearly this: how did this happen? Adolf Hitler identified himself with the great conquerors of history, Alexander the Great, Caesar, Napoleon. Paris, queen of the civilized world. She spawned the Age of Enlightenment, Voltaire, Pascal, Descartes, and nurtured Monet, Cézanne, Matisse. To her writers and poets, Paris was freedom, Paris was love, Paris was France. He saw himself as a messiah sent by Providence to save modern Germany. In his words, the Nazi mission was to secure for the German people the land and soil to which they are entitled on this earth. Hitler's timetable was precise. He would chip away at Europe, reclaiming territory stripped from Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, he seized the Rhineland and claimed he wanted nothing more. In 1938, Austria was annexed, and again Hitler said that was all he wanted. Within 5 days, he set his next target. When Adolf Hitler triumphantly arrived in Paris, he said, "It was a dream of my life to see Paris. I am overjoyed that today my dream has become a reality." The capital city is a traditional diamond that the enemy must snatch to win the game of war. June 14, 1940, German boots stomped along the ancient cobbled streets of Paris.